As we have gone through our comprehensive plan update, we've identified certain things that the community has said that they want to see for the future of the county, as well as looking at what's in our existing plan from 2005. Part of that plan from 2005 stated that we should review and revise as necessary the subdivision ordinance to provide appropriate design for streets and facilities for provision for pedestrian and bicycle travel in new developments. In addition to a lot of things that I think we all are very familiar with, which is being a rural community and developing in areas where we have our public services, and to maintain that rural character out in the rural areas of the county. And so, as we had mentioned before with some of the review we had done, wanted to know, is our code right now actually reflecting what the community wants to be? And in the work that we've done over the past 3 to 4 years, we've consistently heard concerns on the impacts that development could have on our rural nature of the county, that we want to preserve the small town feel of the county, protect those rural agricultural areas and limit development to key areas, and make sure it doesn't sprawl out like you might see in Northern Virginia or other suburban communities. Well, what does that term mean, to be rural? When the CAC did its review of the comprehensive plan in the early 2000s, they looked at that definition in particular. And that definition listed certain things such as a landscape dominated by farm fields, open pasture, cropland, scenic mountains, ridges, and large tracts of woodland. Residential development does not dominate the landscape, that we have clean edges to our villages and towns. Suburban development patterns are not present, that our communities are compact, yet retain that small town atmosphere. So if that's what rural is, what is suburban? Is suburban having cul-de-sacs or large areas with places that buck a park or strip malls? And if we're not to be suburban, what's urban? Is urban urban areas or ideas that people have of what the future could be? Or is urban something that we're more familiar with, something that maybe relates better to be rural? Is urban downtown Toms Brook, or downtown Mount Jackson, or downtown Newmarket? These places that we're very familiar with, that our ancestors built because they brought their practices from Europe. Just like downtown Sandwich, which is the hometown of the founder of Mount Jackson, or downtown Strasbourg, France, which is where our founders of Strasbourg came from. They brought those ideas here and laid the foundation for our future, just like we could lay the foundation for the next generation's future. So how could we do that? We could do that through looking at certain things with our subdivision ordinance to make sure it complies with our existing comprehensive plan, and what we've heard from the citizens is what they want to see for the year 2045. And we can do that through certain standards which address our street and block layouts, as well as certain standards to make sure we're complying with making sure drainage easements and deeds of dedication are filed appropriately, that everyone's covered in the future. So part of what we did was we went and looked at every locality around us to make sure we're complying with the region, and make sure that as developers come here, our processes don't look any different from what anyone else would expect of them. That our standards are just like our neighbors. And from that research and from the ideas that we heard from the public, it allows us to look at certain things such as amending our definitions, just as we did back in May 2023, to make sure we're tying up any loopholes or aspects that are needing to be cleaned up in our code, removing that agricultural subdivision loophole, which allows for individuals to divide land and then develop it later while saying was being used for agricultural purposes. Adding key community resources is reasons for why a division might not want to happen on that property, such as our critical slopes, or wetlands, or sinkholes. Updating our street standards to better reflect what the streets look like already in the community in Mount Jackson or Toms Brook or Strasbourg or any other part of the county, and as well making sure our block standards better reflect that and don't have a suburban style that you'd find in anywhere USA. And where are we talking about in the county? So this is a map of the entire county, all lands that are zoned for residential. And so for the past 50 years, since 1972, when whoever we contracted with to write our subdivision code, which likely wrote the subdivision code for Loudoun County or some other county, imported that suburban style development to us and didn't base it on the history and heritage that had been here for hundreds of years. And this area in total is about 8,268 acres, about 2.5% of the total county. And you can see a breakdown here per zoning district of what we're talking about. But in terms of actual land that could be divided, the subdivision ordinance right now, and will always still state that it has to have public water and sewer. And so we're talking about 1% of the total county acreage in the county. And of that, we're talking about a very select amount of parcels, but still, we want to lay a foundation for a better future for the next generation, just as our ancestors laid a good foundation for us. So it's important to look at the details of that. And in our conversations last year in our walking tours, we talked about what development looked like before 1950 and after 1950. Before 1950, you could walk to the store, you could walk and see your neighbor and have a barbecue with them, or go have a walk with your dog, and it was easy and safe to do that. After that, we saw a lot of development start to occur in small pockets, so you had to drive to everything. There was no way for you to walk to see your neighbor or do anything like that. And still, there's ways that we can look at doing innovative ways to address that with infill, but over the past few decades, things have just consistently gotten worse in terms of connectivity and being able to make sure that you can travel around your community in more than just taking your vehicle. Maybe you want to walk, maybe you want to bike, maybe you want to, walk your dog or do something. You want to have options and flexibility.
Are these towns, or what are these?
These are examples of how development has occurred over the past few decades.
These are actual subdivisions.
Not in our county, but just examples of how development has occurred over the past few decades and how we've consistently seen more suburban style development, more cul-de-sacs, less connectivity as time has gone on.
Thank you.
So let's look at an example here of how this could impact us. So this is an area already zoned residential, about a little over 500 acres south of Edinburgh. It's zoned, like I said, it's zoned residential. It has some floodplain, has some stream buffers on it, and those are all things that we can address currently in our subdivision ordinance. What we can address is critical slopes or sinkholes. So we could wind up with lots that the only place you could build is on top of a sinkhole or on top of a critical slope. So we're not setting those landowners up for success, and we would wind up with bad code leading us to bad development. And in addition to seeing cul-de-sacs and very suburban style development, you also don't see any trees in these subdivisions. But I think that was a good example of what that development could look like. This is a more likely market-driven example where you're going to see even more cul-de-sacs, less connectivity, less addressment of the actual history and natural resources that exist in the county. And when we get down to the street level of that, we also see that there's not much there. Again, there's no trees, there's no amenities, and there's not much space for anyone who wants to use that part of the community. And that doesn't really reflect this image which was generated from our public input as to what the county wanted to see from their streets. And of course, this is a R1 area. It's not downtown Edinburgh, but still, it's not that street you just saw wasn't built for people. It was built for cars. And that again reflects what we heard from the public this summer, is that at the top three things that individuals said is that they want to be rural, wilderness, and walkable. And we say that again on the right-hand side, where they said they want to see development occur in a historic urban like our downtowns, but not suburban and not suburban, so not skyscrapers. We're talking about looking at the way development has occurred here for the past 100 years. And so if we talk about that in terms of the block, right now our current block standards with the subdivision ordinance require very large lengths, so about a 1,200 foot block length, and then very large widths. So it's hard to walk around them. There's not a lot of connectivity. And sometimes it might be easier for you just to drive to your neighbor's house than to walk there. Whereas if we can start to break up the block and add some streets in between them, and then maybe even allow for some flexibility, so maybe you don't want your garage in your front yard, but you want the garage in the back. Well, if we have an alley for you to access it, you have some flexibility to choose where you're going to put your garage when you build your house. So that brings us to the statement that good code gives us good development. So if we have good code, we can see more development like we'd see west of downtown Woodstock or west of downtown Strasburg, and less development like you'd see in Northern Virginia. More development that recognizes our history than something that's been imported here. But good development also not only gives us good development, it gives us flexibility. So it could look like that, it could look like this in a radial, it could look like a different block standard, it could look like some kind of block standard where there's no four-way intersections. The point is that you have flexibility. It's not one size fits all. We can make it work for the community. And just like that with the streets, we have flexibility. The developer could choose to have on-street parking or not. They could design the street so it's a little bit slower, so it makes sense for the bikes to bike in the same space as the cars. Or they could design it so it's even slower, so it's safe for you to walk on the same road as the car, because the car is not going to hit you because it's driving much slower at a 15 mile per hour rate. Why are we talking about speed? Why is speed important? Well, speed is important because the faster you drive, the less you see in your periphery. And so if we are able to design streets that forces the driver to drive slower, it's less likely we're going to have accidents, and we're going to have a safer community for everyone of all ages to be able to walk on the street. And to relate this back to something I think you all might be familiar with, which is our value per acre analysis, which helps show the value of where we put improvements and where we invest our public dollars for private investment. And what that showed us was that our downtowns and the areas that are most compact with the most amount of uses were the most beneficial in terms of generating tax revenue on the acre in the entire county. An example of this is in Newmarket. We see 3 different examples. One is located in a subdivision, one is a townhouse, and another one's in the middle of downtown. And so while the one in the subdivision looks like it might be worth the most, or the one in downtown may not be the most valuable property, if we divide their value by the acre, we see that the property downtown is worth much more than that property in the subdivision. So if we take that same idea of having multiple uses, less space, making the most value out of our public dollars, we can see that too with Stroads, which everybody knows what a street is, right? You know what a road is. So a street is a place. It's where you go out to eat, it's where you live, it's where you walk, it's where you spend time. A road is supposed to get you from point A to point B. A Stroad tries to do both. Example of that could be 42 here in Woodstock, where all the fast food restaurants are. So you try to access a bunch of places to go out to eat, but you're also it's a place to get you somewhere. And so there's a lot of conflict in the users. And here's an example in Morristown, so Route 11. It's not exactly safe to cross there because there's a lot of people driving through the space, but there's also a lot of users on the road. In Orkney Springs, the roads are much narrower. There's a lot of uses, but it's not a throughway. Not only a lot of people are trying to drive through there very quickly, so it's safer. And we can relate that too on the capacity of our streets. So if we can make the most out of the public dollars we've invested in our streets, if we increase the number of types of users, because if we're talking about transportation, we're actually talking about moving people, not cars, but moving people. So how can we most efficiently move people? And that's through allowing people to travel in multiple different ways in the safest ways they can. In addition to addressing, suburban sprawl and aspects of making sure we're not seeing more, style of development like we see in Northern Virginia, our current subdivision ordinance also allows for circumventions of the code, even though it states, that divisions that are to be done for agricultural purposes are not to circumvent the code. There's no ways that we can prevent that from occurring. And this is an example of this. So this is a 47-acre farm, and without using the circumvention regulations, so if you're following the code, you can get a division this year. Well, then they can come back to us in 2026, get your second division, and then in 2029 and get your third division, and in 2032, and finally the farm is divided into 4 parcels. Now you may not want the farm to be divided into 4 parcels in the first place, but our current provisions do allow for this to occur over a longer period of time to make sure that we don't see land developed all at once. With our agricultural exemption, someone could come in and divide the property in half, sell the property to someone, and then both those individuals could come in the next year, and the entire property is now divided into 4 parcels. And there's nothing we can do to stop them from selling the parcels to be built on for residential purposes. So someone is able to build 4 houses 8 years earlier than what our regulations allow. So it's a complete circumvention of the code. So again, overview of why we looked at these updates is, our current subdivision ordinance not only encourages but requires suburban style developments. Things that you'd see in Northern Virginia, not things you'd see in Shenandoah County, Virginia. Passing this update will ensure that we have greater flexibility to work with, the growth of the community to make sure we get the best quality development. And that quality development mirrors the quality of development our towns expect. And so that way there, we set our towns and our future residents up for success. Again, just a quick highlight of everything. We're addressing those definitions from May 2023, removing that loophole, addressing community resources and making sure we address them and suitability, updating our street and block standards to make sure they match the history and heritage of the county. And that way there, we wind up with more places that look like this and less places that look like anywhere USA.